Okay. My name is Professor David Strubler from the Department of Organizational Leadership in the School of Education and Human Services here at Oakland University. Welcome to our video series on leadership. Today, we are joined by Dr. Hirsch Pescovitz, president of Oakland University in Rochester Hills, where she has successfully served for nearly 4 years. I've asked Dr. Pescovitz to share her insights, her philosophy, her own practice of not just good, but great leadership. President Pescovitz has many accomplishments. Let me begin by saying that Oakland University is very proud that Dr. Pescovitz was the first university president in Michigan to lead and announce a plan to respond to the current pandemic. No doubt she achieved this distinction in part because of her medical background, but equally because she has been a highly successful person in healthcare and university strategic leadership here at Oakland University, at the University of Michigan, not to mention 3 years as vice president at a pharmaceutical company. If I may say, the precocious Dr. Pescovitz started her medical education at Northwestern University at the age of just 17. She became a renowned pediatric endocrinologist with over 190 published papers. She was elected to the National Academy of Medicine and is a major contributor to positive transformation in American education. When appointed in 2017, Dr. Pescovitz was our first medical doctor and second female president serving here at Oakland University. She comes from a family of high achievers, starting with her father, Rabbi Richard Hirsch, considered the architect of Reform Zionism. He, a confidant of Martin Luther King Jr., marched in Selma, Alabama, and helped organize the 1963 March on Washington. He also founded the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. Her husband, Mark Pescovitz, was a prominent, highly productive, and successful transplant surgeon. They have 3 successful children, 2 daughters and a son. Eliza, a lawyer, is an associate at Hunton Andrews Kurth in Dallas. Ari is a lead architect at Farah Designs in Brooklyn. And Naomi is a broadcast journalist currently at CBS News in New York City. Her brothers are also successful. Raphael is chair of pediatrics at the University of California in San Francisco. Emil is senior rabbi of Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in Manhattan. And Emmett is vice chair of obstetrics gynecology at North Shore University. What a remarkable family. And she's also received many leadership awards, too many to mention here, but just to name a few, for example, from Becker's Hospital Review, she received the Healthcare Leadership Award back in 2014. She was also named one of 20 hospital and health system leaders to follow on Twitter. She received the Robert H. Williams Distinguished Leadership Award from the Endocrine Society. She was also named one of the top 25 women in healthcare from Modern Healthcare. And she's won numerous awards from her alma mater, Northwestern University, and from Indiana University and the University of Minnesota, where she was recognized for her teaching and research excellence. President Pescovitz, welcome to OU's Organizational Leadership Series in the School of Education and Human Services.
Thank you for that unbelievable introduction, Dr. Strubler. I'm really delighted to be here. It's a great honor.
It's a great honor to have you. So why don't I ask you some questions? We'll start out questions about your own approach to leadership. You have many, many years of experience, and I know our students and our listeners will benefit from your experience. So as I just mentioned, you're well known for your high achievement, strategic leadership, and ability to get things done. As a professional, a human being, a woman, a minority, a person of faith, as a leader, what motivates you to be so consistently, and I might even say persistently, positive and productive? And to what extent do both your personality and your background influence you? I'm just curious about this.
Well, that's a lot of questions to try to answer. So I guess I'll just give you both what I think the answer is and I guess my philosophy as well. I think that we're a combination of nature and nurture. And so I guess when I think about myself, I probably was born with a certain personality and I grew up in a certain family. You took some time to talk about both my siblings and my children. So I think I was born with an upbeat, optimistic, happy personality. And I would say that I wake up very early every day, and most days for me, the sun is shining, even when it's cloudy and snowy. So I happen to be an optimistic, positive person. And I guess that is an advantage, even when times are difficult or tough. I would just say that maybe the hardest thing that ever happened to me personally was that my husband, who you spoke about, was killed in a car accident 10 years ago. But even during times of difficulty, like the difficult year that we just experienced, or that personal tragedy that I experienced, I do tend to have resilience. And so I would say that that is a positive, maybe genetic trait that I possess. But the second thing I would say that has been maybe advantageous to me, and that I think that anyone can acquire, is the circumstances that you see around you. And in my own case, I grew up in a family that nurtured many of the qualities and characteristics that I think are very important for our students and for leadership. And for me, these were some very important things that you alluded to when you talked about my family. So on my mother's side, I am first generation American, and I'm a first generation college student. And I think that many of the things that my mother instilled in me are very important. And these are things like the value of hard work, the value of education, the importance of trying to be considerate of other people. My mother grew up in Siberia during World War II and suffered from very extreme poverty. And her father was killed by Stalin when she was just a child. And most of her family perished in the Holocaust. And so she had an extremely difficult childhood. When she eventually came to the United States, having grown up during communism, she was a passionate capitalist. And she and my father, who was born in America, never voted similarly in any election. And that's really relevant to one of the things that I do want to talk about, which is about the diversity of thought. My father, on the other hand, was born in the United States. And he instilled in me, you already talked about it, he grew up in Cleveland, but he became very, very active in the civil rights movement. And as a result of his activities, that became a very important part of my childhood. And I remember accompanying my parents to the March on Washington when I was just 6 years old, and being highly influenced by Martin Luther King's very famous I Have a Dream speech, sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. But growing up during that era when my parents had at our home people of all races, all religions, all socioeconomic groups, and varying views. I already alluded to the fact that my parents themselves never shared political views. And that was very helpful to know that it was possible to have a diversity of thought. I thought I might just share a picture of my father here. I hope you can see it. Can you tell me if you can see that? It's a picture of my dad with President Johnson here. He is receiving one of the pens that was used by President Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that was in recognition of my father's contributions to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He was very prominent during that work, which, if people know the history, recognize that much of the work for the civil rights movement was actually done by interdenominational clergy. And so this was a big part of my father's life. But it contributed to both my brother's activities and mine towards diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice, something that has been a very important theme for me for every single job that I have had throughout my entire life, including here at Oakland, where the very first thing that I did when I got here was to ask Glenn McIntosh to become our Chief Diversity Officer. And the second thing I did was to add diversity, equity, and inclusion to our strategic plan.
So it's safe to say that your upbringing had a profound influence and still has a profound influence on your leadership and the direction that you go, even the content of your leadership.
Yes. And I think when I look at my siblings as well, I would say that although three of the four of us are physicians, all four of us have a very similar approach to wanting to make a difference and having an impact. And although we might be doing it in slightly different ways, I think the need to make a difference is something that all of us share. And that undoubtedly comes from our family.
And a good foundation for leadership, to say the least.
I would say so.
So you also said that you regard yourself as a servant leader, that's your leadership style. Can you explain to us what you mean by servant leadership? What does it look like in the various leader roles that you've held? And how has it shaped the way you approach your leadership, well, even here at Oakland University?
Well, I'm familiar, I'm very interested in the different types of leadership. And, while I understand that there are different kinds of leaders, the definition that Robert Greenleaf has used for a servant leader, I think probably defines me best, although I would say that I'm probably a hybrid of several different types of leaders. The reason that I think that servant leader definition resonates best with me of the different types, if I were just to pick one rather than say that I'm a combination of several types, is because I don't think that I'm there to be the focus of the institution. I'm there to serve the institution. And when I think about what I'm supposed to do, I think of myself as a vehicle of moving the institution forward. And so even when I came to Oakland, as a single example, one of the very first things I did when I was a candidate for the presidency, I looked for the institutional strategic plan. And I thought about, is this a good plan? And does it have a good direction? And I thought that it did. So I didn't try to edit the plan. And that's, I think, an example of why I thought I was there to serve. I did think that it was missing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I worked to complement that and supplement it and move it forward. But I didn't change it. I didn't say it was defective and come in as a new leader and say, let's trash this and start all over again. And I think that is one way that a leader serves the institution, tries to take it from one place, maybe, using Jim Collins' concept of good to great, but doesn't come in and say, it's about me. I'm going to go get rid of everything that was here and start again and take it from scratch because I'm a better leader than the ones that preceded me. I believe in working on the legacy of those that came before, recognizing that each one of us starts on the shoulders of those that preceded us.
Absolutely. So in addition, you mentioned you do have other styles, and you described your style as a wheel with hubs and spokes. I don't think I've ever heard that before. As opposed to a more autocratic, hierarchical leader, sort of, I think you mentioned the Christmas tree where you've got the leader at the top and down below everyone else is there. So in practice, how does that wheel lead to OU moving forward as the university of choice? How does this tie into reimagining the OU process?
Yeah, I think I need to explain that a little bit because most organizations, all universities, companies, businesses, and nonprofits, most organizations are organized in a hierarchical structure. You would think of them in a pyramidal structure. So they are structured like a Christmas tree. That is the organization. You have a leader at the top, whether they're a president, as we have at a university, or a CEO, if you would have it as a company, or of a nonprofit or a for-profit. But there's a leader at the top. And the reason I call it pyramidal is that as you move down the rest of the organization, you have more and more people. Boston Consulting Group, for example, says that each person should have under them approximately 8 people below them. That's the ideal number of people that a leader should have reporting to them, 8 to 10. So let's just say a president should have 8 to 10 people in their cabinet. Each of those people should have 8 to 10. So you could see you would have 1 times 8 would be 8, then 64, then another times 8. And that's how you get, if you just multiply that out, you get a pyramidal structure. So 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. And depending upon how many you had, in an ideal world, that would be the size of your organization. We have 19,000 students approximately, but that's how we get there. But if you think about us, we have a president, then we have a cabinet, then we have deans, so that's how we get to the size of the organization. So we are structured that way too. In many of these organizations, the leader at the top is autocratic or imperial. That is the way it works. And when you think about a Christmas tree, it looks like a Christmas tree. A Christmas tree, sometimes they're fake, but even when they're not fake, you've cut them down, so they're no longer alive. So you think of them as maybe immobile. So that's the way I think about a Christmas tree. I don't like to think about leadership that way because it doesn't move and it's immobile. I like to, and yet we're structured that way too, but I like to think of myself instead of that, even though we're structured that way, as a wheel with a hub and spokes. And the reason I want you to visually think of it like that is because I like to think of myself in the center of a wheel with spokes that move out. And yes, we're very large too. But if you think of a wheel, that should give you a sense of momentum and movement and forward thinking and positive movement. And I like that idea because Oakland is on the go. We are moving forward and we are becoming the university of choice. The other reason I like to think of myself not at the top, but in the middle of our organization is because I like to get and give feedback in a bi-directional exchange with all of the people in our organization. And yes, we do have concentric circles that similarly could be 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. So we do get bigger and bigger and bigger as we go out, just like with a Christmas tree. So it does get larger and larger as you move. But in this model, we are getting feedback that goes in a bi-directional exchange from throughout the organization in a more vibrant and movement-like manner. And we're in a constant kind of, you might think of it dynamically. Well, just as an example, and you asked about reimagining OU, one way to think of this as an actual real life example of how we use this is something that we actually started in the fall of 2019. where I challenged the university to reimagine Oakland University. And that's because in looking at our infrastructure, I felt that there was a great opportunity for us to do better in a number of different ways. And I thought we could do that if we looked at our entire infrastructure. These things started from looking at our values, looking at how we financed ourselves, looking at sustainability, looking at advising, a whole variety of different things, IT, communications. So I interviewed all of our deans and sought two chairs to co-chair this large committee, this task force, and then invited 30 members of staff and faculty from throughout the organization at all different levels. So not just from the top, but again, the spokes of the organization to become members of the Reimagining OU Task Force. And since the fall of 2019 through today, these members of the task force have been working on Reimagining OU, and they have been highly productive. And to date, they have developed the institutional values statement. They have completely helped me to reorganize our cabinet. They are working diligently and have come up with an amazing sustainability plan, which is still in progress. They are working very well on helping us reorganize IT and a number of other important initiatives. So this is a great example of how this model is highly effective. And it doesn't come, I conceived the concept, but the organization is changing it. So I'm very proud of that.
So this is really a cross-functional, cross-functional, but also cross-level, because
yes.
You said you include people from all levels.
Right.
And sort of, Cynthia Stoll from Purdue University calls this the parallel organization. It's the organization behind the structure that glues it together in a sense. And it sounds like that's exactly what this has done. You have created a structure behind the structure that pulls it all together. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes, I hadn't heard that. And again, I'm not a scientist like you are in this space, but I'll read about what she has defined because I'd like to learn more about it. But yes, I think that's it's a great example of what she's talked about. Maybe we should contact her and ask her if it works.
Well, that sounds good. I'd love to talk to her again. Also, you established something else that I think is also cross-functional called the rules of engagement. And as I recall, they are results, trust, conflict, commitment, and accountability. Can you tell us how these rules work, how they influence our students, our staff, and our faculty, well, to work together at the university? And I have to be honest with you, I'm most interested in the one on conflict.
Yeah.
Because there's so much talked about that now.
Yeah, I pulled it out here so you could just see what it actually looks like. Can you see that? I just want to make sure. Yeah, and then I'll talk to you about each of them. So first of all, I do want to be clear. This is not used necessarily across the whole university, and it wasn't designed to be used across the university, but it could be. And I would encourage others to adopt similar kinds of rules for their own different units. So I had done this previously. This isn't my first rodeo in terms of leadership. So I've been in high leadership positions for maybe now close to 20 years. So I had done this in prior roles. I took what I had done previously and brought this concept to our cabinet and asked the cabinet to develop these kinds of rules specifically for the cabinet. So, this has not been disseminated across the entire university. And these are rules by which the cabinet needs to work in order to be effective. So let me maybe explain why they're important and how they're intended to be used. So at the core is the concept of results. So the middle one, just to put this back up here so you can see, is results. And there are a lot of words in here. These words were created, I used the five big words, the bold ones, and then made the cabinet come up with the principles that are in smaller letters below. And maybe we could distribute this to your class later so that they can see what's inside those smaller boxes. But the point about results is that if we're going to become a university of choice, we have to agree on what is in the common good for that part of the organization, in our case, the cabinet. So we have to reach a consensus, or it's not always by consensus, and it's definitely not by vote, but we have to decide on what is the result that we are after. And once we reach that decision on what are we aiming for, what are we trying to accomplish, then we have to decide how we're going to get there. So as a team, because we don't accomplish what we're after by, as I already said, by a dictator at the top, an autocratic imperial dictator at the top saying, okay, everybody's going to do what Aura says. That's not how we get things done at the institution. So we have to decide what it is we're after, and then we have to decide how we're going to get there. In order to do that, the team has to have trust among the different members of the team, especially when, as you might realize, in our case, these are vice presidents, may have overlapping interests. So you could imagine a situation where the vice president for student affairs might not always have the same interests as the provost or the vice president for, let's just say, the CFO. There could be conflicts. So they must have trust in one another. And that is a very important element in order to work together towards that common goal. The third element that's here is a commitment. And that's a commitment that we're all going to work together towards that common goal. The fourth is accountability. And what that means is that each person knows who is going to be responsible for doing what by when, and we hold ourselves and each other accountable for getting that done. It also means that we challenge one another and we are respectful, and we call one another out when there is disrespect, which happens in teams because very often people are disrespectful to one another, and we don't permit that to happen. And then finally, to the point that you made and the one that you were most interested in, conflict. So once there is agreement on what result we are after, we welcome spirited debate and constructive conflict. And here is why. This gets back to the point that I brought up from my early childhood, how I grew up in a place where my parents didn't agree. I grew up with differing viewpoints in our guests that came to our home. And the fact that here we at Oakland welcome diversity of thought, people from different religions, people from different races, people from different countries, people from different viewpoints, people from different parties. And the reason that we welcome debate and constructive conflict is because there are many ways to get to a particular result. And by welcoming those different ways to get there, when we're considering those ways, is because we're going to have a lot more creativity, entrepreneurial thinking, and at the end, we're going to get to better ideas about how to get there if we consider all those different ways in that spirited discussion. However, after the discussion, it is important that we agree on the decision of the way we're going to follow. And once the decision is reached that this is the process we choose, then if there is trust in the team, even if my way wasn't chosen, I have to buy into the final way that we're going to go. And we all have to commit to follow that way. And that is really important for a team. And each of us has to hold one another accountable that we're going to follow the chosen way. Now, there is one other thing that I didn't share with you previously, but that is important to remember, that after some period of time of following that chosen way, there is a period where we reevaluate if that way was the right way. And that's another process that we use that's called PDCA, plan, do, check, and act. Because by checking whether we were right on track or not, we have the opportunity to reevaluate whether we were doing it properly or not. Because it's conceivable that we would tweak our methodology. And maybe those people that thought we should have done it another way were right. And that was why it was good to listen to the spirited discussion. But that's why it's not just about one leader. And that is why I really believe in teams.
Wonderful. So you've done a lot of reading in leadership. And in fact, I am recommending to my students, and already have the book that you mentioned, Adam Grant's book on Give and Take. So I'm sending them some information on that at your recommendation. So thank you for that. And also, you have come up on your own, I believe, with 8 qualities that you consider to be critical to good leadership. And the list that I have here is moral compass, compassion, courage, contribution, commitment, communication, collaboration, and creativity. There they are, right there. And I was wondering if you could tell us how all of those work together for good.
Yeah.
When it comes to leadership.
Yeah, and I would say that over probably 15 years, I've been putting these 8 C's together. I've added to them. I hope I don't add any more because that's enough. But I would say that any one person has some of these. But as I've thought about it, extraordinary leaders, and I've thought about this for a long time. I've looked to people that I thought were, extraordinary leaders. The extraordinary leaders have all of these qualities. And that's, in my mind, when I think about people that I truly admire, they have all of these 8 together. That differentiates extraordinary leaders from ordinary leaders. And when I think about those, and maybe if we have time, I could say a word about each. Do we have a moment?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because then I would just say a moment about each of what these mean to me, because it might be worth a moment. So at the core is a moral compass. And what that means to me is if it grounds someone. A moral compass is a person's direction. It is their sense of right from wrong. It might be their conscience. If they're a religious person, for them, it is their core religion. If you're not a particularly religious person, you still have a moral compass to drive you and let you know what gets you up in the morning and what is your sense of direction. And it might be, for example, your purpose. It might be, for example, what drives us. For example, at Oakland, it could be our mission and our vision. But I think for an individual, it is their sense of right from wrong. The second thing, and by the way, as I said, the truly extraordinary leaders have all of these. The second thing is compassion. And this is an ability that someone has to put themselves in another person's shoes and experience empathy. It's the notion to know that no matter how difficult your particular circumstances, it is not more difficult than someone else's. So, we all just experienced a very difficult year, but one of the things that we can all realize is that no matter how hard it was for us, there is someone who had it harder. And I do have to say that, you know, when my husband died, it was helpful for me to think about the fact I was working at the University of Michigan Health System at the time. All I had to do to help myself from getting into a real rut was walk through the hospital and realize that there were people who suffered much more than I did. And so this was helpful to feel this sense of compassion. The next one is courage. And, you know, courage in my mind, in a way, is just being unafraid to fail or to be wrong. It's the ability to always do the right thing, even in the face of adversity. And I admire people who have that courage. And you can think today about our healthcare providers who exhibited enormous courage to put themselves at risk during this COVID crisis when they were caring for others. The next one I feel very strongly about, this is contribution. And this is the idea that the work that we do is very important and that we want it to make a difference. You know, I frequently think about Anne Frank, who always said, isn't it amazing that no one need wait but a single moment before starting to make the world a better place? That was what she meant, you know, that she wanted to make this enormous contribution. And yet she died at the age of 16. So she never really had a life to make a contribution. But yet somehow her diary went on to make this important life-changing contribution. And the next one is commitment. We talked about commitment and the rules of engagement, but commitment is actually that hard work that you do. You know, a lot of these are just words, but commitment is that hard work that you do, and it is the brute force that you put into it. And then the next two are about teams. So the next one is communication, the idea that you can do a lot by yourself, but if you're not communicating your ideas to others, it is not going to matter. You have to be able to share and articulate your ideas. Otherwise, you're working alone. And then the next one is also about teams. It's collaboration. You know, just as we've been talking about, a leader could be out there by themselves, but if they're not bringing others along, then the work falls flat. So we don't succeed in isolation. We do have to bring others along with us. And then finally, the one that I think really distinguishes extraordinary people from ordinary is creativity. You can think about Steve Jobs and other really amazing people, Bill Gates too. You know, really what distinguishes people who are amazing is that creativity. People who are creative look at the same thing that everybody else sees. You know, they see a piece of wire and they turn it into a paperclip and turn that into something useful. And so how did they do that? And think of all the uses for a paperclip. That's creativity. But creative people see the same thing that everybody else sees and they make something amazing out of it. Or I'm wearing a bio button. How did somebody know to do that and turn that into something so useful? So creative people see ordinary things and make something extraordinary out of that. So I think it's that combination of 8 C's that really extraordinary leaders have.
Yeah, and in research, we call that the interaction effect, which is a synergistic effect that when you put them all together, this times this times this times this, we get that synergistic effect, which creates excellence, not just the ordinary. And that's wonderful. Well, we have a little bit more time, and you said something to me that fascinated me. You talked about moon landings. Can you tell us what you mean by moon landings and leadership?
Well, it's one of my favorite concepts, I guess. So I want your students to think about this. So what do you guys think of if I say, what do you think of when I ask you, what is a moon landing? And most people think that's a really great thing. You know, you had this huge accomplishment. You landed on the moon. And so that is a pretty cool thing. But it's a huge accomplishment to get to land on the moon. But it only is a great thing if you weren't aiming higher. So what if you were aiming and shooting for the stars and you landed on the moon? Then it might have only been your second choice or your third choice or your fourth choice. And so a moon landing is a great thing if it's your first choice, but it might be a sign of having missed something. So I like to talk a lot about failure. And the reason I like to talk about failure is because I like people to know that everyone in life experiences failure. And I like people to understand that failure is actually a great thing because all of us experience it at many times in our lives. And that failure is, first of all, how we learn. And secondly, failure is really an opportunity to succeed. And in my own life, most of my life has been moon landings. Actually, right outside of my early childhood, where I had a lot of star landings. After that, I probably have had almost all moon landings. And I want our students to know that moon landings are really terrific because if you shoot for first of all, you should shoot for the stars. You should always aim high because if all you aim to do is cross the street, that's as far as you're going to go. So if you aim to shoot for the stars, you might land on a star. But if you miss, you might have a moon landing. And that is really terrific. But if you don't aim high, you're never going to go anywhere. So you need to aim as high as you possibly can. And you might get there and you might miss. And if you miss, there's nothing tragic about that. You might get there eventually and you might have a moon landing. And that is a great thing. And you don't need to tell anyone anything except that you got a moon landing. And that would be great too. And for most people that know about my life, they think that I've had a lot of moon landings and that they think that's what I've aimed for. And I only am going to share with you that some of those moon landings were second, third, or fourth choices.
Well, thank you for your honesty and telling us about, and I think the metaphor of the moon landing is incredibly helpful because it does keep us still challenged to go for something higher and at the same time to also be grateful for those moon landings, which are part of our learning, our growing, and what you talked about earlier, our contribution to the world and making a difference. And you certainly have done that and are continuing to do that. And we hope that you will continue to do that in your life for the rest of your life as you move forward wherever you land. And we're grateful, though, that you landed here at Oakland University. And we just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to share this with our students. And because I know that it's inspiring to me as a professor to talk to a very successful practitioner who is a leader. And I know it's inspiring to our students. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you have many more stars to achieve as you go forward.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Strubler. This was a lot of fun, and I wish I could see the students in person, but I'm happy to be here on Zoom with you.
Well, you're certainly welcome to come anytime. the door is open, or I should say the Zoom is open.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day.
You too.